going to start off talking about the bounce of your clubs. The more bounce that you have, the easier it's going to be for the club to skip through the sand. So when you're looking at the difference between hard packed sand or hard pan versus fluffy sand, you want to recognize that the more bounce you have, the less you want to use that club in hard pan, because it wants to bounce and skip off the hard stuff. But it would be more desirable for a fluffy sand shot. In the two clubs you have here, I got a 50 degree, which is like a gap wedge, and it's 8 degrees of bounce. Now the bounce specifically, just that way you understand what we're talking about, is when I have the shaft straight up and down, the leading edge of the club is slightly off the ground. So that bottom angle of this here, not the face angle, but this bottom edge angle, it's angled 8 degrees compared to the level ground. It's 8 degrees angled this way. So that way when the club comes through, it wants to bounce off the ground, just like the front of a pontoon on a boat. So when it comes to making the shot, what you want to recognize is, okay, in sand like this, where it's not very hard, it's got some firm texture to it, so it's not completely fluffy, it's not hard, it's actually very good sand right here. What you want to do is you want to really just make sure that you're hitting the sand out of the bunker. This wedge is 60 degrees, which has 10 degrees more loft, like 2.5 more clubs. Instead of your gap wedge, it's very much a lob wedge with 7 degrees bounce. Again, not too much bounce. A lot of bounce is 12, 14 degrees. You've got 8 and 7 degrees, not a lot of bounce. So you don't have to worry about these for hard pan. These are good for hard pan, especially your 7 degrees is good for hard pan, because it's not going to be as bouncy. And the different approach between hard pan and fluff is going to be, for me, the club face that I've got set up. How open is it? So when I have a fluffy lie, the more I open my club face with my, say, 50 degree, 8 degree bounce wedge, then the more bounce I'm putting on. So the more I open up the club face, the more bounce it's actually giving me. It's really making that leading edge off the level of the ground. So on fluffy lies, we can go ahead and open up the club face, because we can afford to have bounce. On hard pan lies, you can have the club face a little bit more square, where there isn't bounce. And both of them you're going to hit behind the ball. One's just going to make it a lot less of a skip through, and the other one is going to make it more of a strike instead of a slide. So the sand is going to get struck, but it's harder sand. And so the harder the sand, the more dense it is. The more dense the sand is, the less force you need to go through the sand to propel that ball out of the bunker. Okay, so fluffy sand, more power, open up the club face, more of an aggressive swing. Hard pan, less club face, which is more square and not as much of a need for the swing through the sand with that much force. So those are the major ideas. As far as setting it up, that's all the same, but it's all a relationship. So the more I open up my club face, the more I'm going to open up my stance. But when I open up my stance, I got to make sure that I'm, like right now, that golf ball, if I drew a line along my feet, that golf ball is right in the middle of my stance. If I open up my feet, now that golf ball is way in the back of my stance, so I have to make my adjustments. So now the line of my feet, ball's in the middle of my feet. So as I open up my stance, now I have to open up the club face to compensate for that open stance. And as much as my stance is open is as much as my club face is going to be open. They compensate each other. Okay, so as we're doing the hard pan without opening up the club face, I can just get squared up to the target, because my club face is going to be squared up. I don't have to open up the stance. If I open up the stance a little bit, open up the club face a little bit. The harder the sand, the more you're going to be squared up. The fluffier the sand, the more open you can be. Just make sure that when you get open, you get adjusted so that the ball is positioned in the center. And then you swing down that line of where your feet are. Club face is open and the ball comes out in the middle. Every time. What I want to do is I want to describe how the pitching technique works with the swing plane and how it's your foundation, your platform to build the full swing on. So we're going to talk about how does the pitching work into a full swing and how the swing plane is a common denominator between the two and how it all works. Okay, so the proper pitching technique and how that becomes your platform and foundation for a solid swing, specifically focusing on the swing plane. Okay, so these lines here from this direction is going to be my target line. Okay, and what I want to do is we want to make sure, as far as the pitching technique is concerned, and this plane, is in order to get the club started on plane, what I like to see personally is my 1, 2, and 3 points of my triangle being a unit to start the takeaway. Okay, so that way my hands aren't doing anything, my shoulders doing everything, and by that point, when my hands have gotten to my left thigh, then what I've done is I've really incorporated my shoulders into the swing from the beginning, instead of having a hand flippy takeaway and my shoulders haven't done anything. So as you take this unit takeaway from this perspective, you can see that the club is right on plane. Okay, from here, the challenge with the swing plane and every player is finding out how is the club face going to relate to that plane. And the reason it's different for every player is because it's always going to come down to a relationship of your hand rotation to square up the club face, or your body rotation to square up the club face, and it is a blend of the two. For each person, it's a little different blend depending on their flexibilities and their limitations. So we got the swing plane, and then how much the hands rotate is going to have something to do with how much their body will be able to rotate on the way through. For starters, we want to take it, it's going to feel like your club face is shut, okay? Although it's square when I stand straight up. It's square when I stay tilted, okay? So there's a little misnomer out there. If you're tilted and your club face is straight up and down, then it's really going to be open because it's not working with, this is square, this is square, this is square. I'm tilted now, okay? So what happens is, as I take it to the next point, keep this on plane, ideally what I'm looking for is for this shaft to be pointing at this target line. So when I take the club back, the shaft here, if I had a laser coming out of the bottom, would be pointing right at that shaft, all the way down to that line, all the way down to that line, until the club gets parallel. Once it gets parallel, and then beyond, now this shaft is pointing at this line extension. It's going to keep on pointing at this ball line here, all the way, all the way, all the way in the backswing, okay? So how that works is my one-piece takeaway, and then you're starting to feel the hands this way instead of a lot of hand rotation. Once you have a lot of hand rotation, open up the club face, you get a cupped right wrist, and then you have to take this open club face and return the hands to get that club face square. A lot of rotation in the hands is not ideal for the starting point to find out where we're at with our abilities. So I'm looking for a one-piece takeaway, let the hands flip back like that, keeping this wrist flat. Now that wrist is flat, and what we're talking about is that this flat right wrist is not towards the sky, and it's not straight across from me here. It's at an angle, same kind of angle that we started the shaft wanted to address, okay? Similar 45 type angle, okay? So, again, to review, our one-piece takeaway with the shoulders, then the hands are, this motion here is one that takes a lot of practice. What's natural is more of a turning of the wrist this way, and then that's where we get this cupped at the top. Now, we got to make sure that as long as this is the approach you're going to take, where you're going to look to keep that right wrist flat back and then down through, and I'll get into the downswing here in a second, but let's just really be sure that as long as you're going for this position, that when your hands are on the grip, on the club, they're in a neutral position to start with. So that way, there's that, especially if I have that at impact, there's my flat wrist. Okay, so that's a neutral. If my hands are neutral on the club face, then this is neutral at the top. So the grip has to be neutral in order for this to be valuable. If your hands don't match the club face, I'll give you an example. If the club face is square and my hand doesn't match the club face and I come through at impact, naturally my hand's going to want to extend, and what happens is that makes this relationship. So this is why I want the club face and the grip neutral for beginners, for starters. Okay, now one piece takeaway, the hand's getting flat to this point, shaft is on plane. This is longer than a pitch and it's not quite the full swing, so the pitch becomes this one piece takeaway and a little bit of this wrist. That's the pitch. The full swing from there is a little bit more of an arm lift and then a shoulder turn from there. Okay, from that position we can start getting into the impact, which I'm going to talk to you about now as far as pitching is concerned, which is the same impact as we're going to have for the full swing. So as I face this way, as if I'm going to hit the golf ball here into this club, the idea is to recognize that this is my target line now. When I have the golf ball in the middle of my stance, I might have my one piece takeaway, then I add a little bit of wrist for the pitch. The first move down that I'm looking for is to get right into this right ankle, under the ankle, right on top. So I'm looking to get, I get my one piece takeaway, a little hinge, and then I'm getting right under that ankle. That first move here is getting my center a little bit past the ball, which is going to increase the chances of me hitting the ball before the ground. Okay? So I'll actually get set up for this, get my feet a little closer together, my one piece takeaway, a little wrist, and then I get into that right ankle. And after I get that first bump move, which is not just hips, it's a little bit of hips and shoulder here, okay? From here, then I can start the rotation of my body, which delivers the club, okay? As I continue to turn my body through, I'm not using my hands, as you can see, for this pitch shot. So it becomes a real body delivery, okay? Here's my one piece takeaway, little pitch, wrist action, move into that right ankle, rotate through my body, and that's what's squaring up the club face. This is how I finish up, okay? So with my pitch shot, I do have some dynamic motion here in the feet and then in the body turn. And that really becomes the foundation for the full swing. So you've got your one piece takeaway, you get your hinge, then you have a little bit more arm lift and shoulder turn. That's a fuller swing. From here, same thing. Shift into that right heel, that right ankle, okay? Which is from this angle, as I'm shifting into this side. The reason I want right under my ankle is because that's where this whole pivot point comes from. My whole post that I'm turning around is on top of my ankle, not on top of my toes, so I don't want the weight here on the balls of my feet. Then I'll have to correct and get out of that improper balance problem. So here, again, we're taking the club back, one piece takeaway, having the hinge. If we're going to go into a longer swing, it's going to be rotation and a little arm lift, and getting into that right heel. Once we get into that right heel, then we can turn the body through. And then from here, for a fuller swing, the hands continue to rotate, keeping the club on plane and finishing up. And that's the similarities that you have between the pitching and the full swing. Pitching being the foundation for that whole impact area, the swing plane, what you're doing with your wrists, how you distribute your weight, how you turn through the ball. All those are going to be really well developed through your pitching technique.